Hey everybody, this is Dream, and today we have a 7-game baseball slate for you today. Before I get started, can you guys smash that like and subscribe button? It really does help the channel a lot. Also, can you drop a home run call in the comments below, and if you get one right, I will shout you out in tomorrow's video. Make sure to take a look at the weather for this Detroit-Baltimore game. It is very dicey at this point, and so we're going to have to check back closer to time to see if we have that game playing or not. Hopefully they call it before the slate gets close. It is the first game of the slate, so that does give us an advantage from that perspective, hopefully knowing that that will be called. With that said, let's get into our core plays here for DraftKings and FanDuel. So I have Salvador Perez, Winker, and then Ref Snyder over here on DraftKings. And then on FanDuel, I have Perez, Machado, and Juan Soto. So do keep those core plays in mind. So let's go and get started here on DraftKings. Now let's look at our pitching. And obviously here on DraftKings we need two pitchers. So we have some decent options today. Luis Castillo is our first option. He's been really solid to start the season. In three out of 4 games, over 24 fantasy points. He's got a tough matchup here against St. Louis, but he does have a decent strikeout rate, which gives us some upside in this situation. Though he's not the best strikeout rate that we normally get for high-end pitchers, but he is somebody worth taking a look at. His price is pretty reasonable on this slate. Kyle Gibson for Baltimore is in an interesting spot. If this game plays, he's definitely somebody to consider, but he's a little bit high risk, high reward in this situation. I wish he was a little bit cheaper, but he's one of the few guys on the slate, I think, that has really 20 fantasy point upside, and so he is worth taking a look at as a P2 option. Andrew Heaney for Texas, also in a similar boat of Gibson when it comes to being a decent P2 option due to the fact that he gets some strikeouts, which benefit him. But he's somewhat risky. He hasn't been particularly great to start the season, but he had a really good game against Kansas City, and he's got a nice matchup here against Oakland. He tends to, checking back to last year, he tends to do pretty good against the weaker teams, but tends to have a rougher time against the good teams. So he's definitely in play here, but he's risky. I wish he was a little bit cheaper. And then Kyle Wright for Atlanta. Now, this is a tough matchup against Houston. He's been up and down to start the season. He hasn't really had a really good game yet, but he was really solid all of last season. And he's got one of the better K rates, and he also has 20 plus fantasy potential here. His price is very cheap for this situation, so he is a very interesting option here. He's risky, but he definitely has some potential. His price makes him gives him a lot of potential here on DraftKings, more so than on FanDuel. Framber Valdez here for Houston. He's also a high risk, high reward option today for Houston against Atlanta. Now, he does get enough strikeouts that he can potentially have a pretty good strikeout day and still give up a couple earned runs, which is basically what he's done so far to start the season. And so he does have that upside, but he is the most expensive option that we've talked about here on the slate. Let's go ahead and move into our starting catchers. And I like Salvador Perez as a core play. He looks like a really good option today. He's been bust so far this season, but he has a nice matchup, and he's got the best metrics of all the catchers on the slate. Another good option here is Cal Raleigh for Seattle. He looks like he's an interesting spot here. He's high risk, high reward, though, but he's cheap, and if you want to save some money at this position, he's somebody you can definitely maneuver to and a good matchup. And then Sean Murphy for Atlanta. He's in a really good spot here, and so he's definitely worth taking a look at, but he's also fairly expensive, but he's a good contrarian play off of Perez. I don't know what's wrong with FanDuel or DraftKings here. The lines are not matching up here, but so just bear with that. Here at first base, Vinny Pasquantino, he comes out as a really good option. He's high risk, high reward in this matchup against the Angels, but he definitely has some potential here, and he's got good metrics for this matchup, so he's definitely worth taking a look. Then we're going to look at Justin Turner, who I really like today as a decent option against Milwaukee for Boston. He's very home run potential in this one, which has not really happened for him much to start the year. He's not hitting the ball particularly great either, but he definitely has that potential, and it's just a matter of time before he starts hitting the ball pretty well. Shohei Ohtani is also a very interesting option today. He's extremely expensive, but he is definitely rosterable on this slate considering he has home run potential in this one. So he's high risk, high reward, but he definitely has potential here. Matt Carpenter is a Hail Mary play for San Diego. He looks like a pretty solid option though, and he has some nice upside, but he is a boomer bust potential, from a home run perspective. And then Rowdy Tellez, who's just been playing really well lately. He's got home run potential again today, and he has some nice upside for this matchup. And then we're going to look at second base and start with Ozzy Albies. He has a very good matchup here against Houston. Now he hasn't he is going against a tough pitcher, but he's hitting the ball extremely well lately, and so I really like his upside. He is priced up, but he's definitely worth taking a look at. Marcus Semien for Texas is extremely expensive, but he is viable here on the slate. Texas looks like a great stack, and so he's definitely worth definitely somebody I'm going to consider today. Brandon Drury is kind of a Hail Mary play at this position. He can also play first base as well. He hasn't hit the ball particularly well, but he's kind of in a boomer bust situation, so he's definitely worth taking a look at in the plus matchup. Then we'll look at third base here for Austin Riley. Now, I don't love Atlanta as a stack, but Riley definitely has some nice potential in this matchup, along with Albies. You could do a two-player stack with those two guys. I think those are the best options on Atlanta today. Manny Machado is a little bit cheaper and has just as much upside, if not more here. He hasn't hit the ball to start the season all that well, but he does have home run potential, and he's just a matter of time before he starts to get going here, so he's definitely in play here. Josh Rojas has some nice upside here for Arizona against San Diego. Now he's not really he hadn't hit any home runs, but he's hitting 324, and he is scoring a decent amount of fantasy points game to game, so he is worth taking a look here. And Eugenio Suarez is a really good way to save some money at this position. He's hitting the ball pretty solidly. He's scoring fantasy points most games, and he has some potential for home runs, so he is definitely viable on the slate. Xander Bogaerts at shortstop is one of my favorite plays at shortstop at $5,100. He's got really nice upside in this matchup. He's definitely worth a consideration. He's just smashing the ball, and he's got some really good upside here. Then we'll look at Willie Adames, who's another guy I like from Milwaukee. He has hit the ball pretty solid to start the year. He's got home run potential in this one. He's definitely worth taking a look. And then Mighty's Diaz for Oakland. He is a Hail Mary option here. He's a very extreme boomer bust option, but he's cheap. And if you want to save some money, he's definitely a way you can do it. You could also stick him at third base as well. And moving into the outfield here, we're going to start with Trout, who is extremely expensive, but he's got home run potential here. He's got a big time game in this upcoming soon, so hopefully it's today. He hadn't had a home run in several games since 4-9, so it's just a matter of time before he blows one up, and this looks like a really prime matchup for him to do so. Juan Soto also looks really solid today, despite hitting the ball extremely terribly to start the season. He is finally starting to get together a couple games, despite he's striking out a lot. He has some upside in this matchup, and so he's definitely worth considering, but he is fairly expensive. Ref Snyder for Boston looks like a great option on this slate. All the metrics just scream for him to have a really solid game, and he does have some power potential occasionally in specific matchups, and this definitely fits. Not only that, but he's super cheap, so it definitely helps pay up for other options. Jesse Winkler is also in a really good spot. He has home run potential here. He hasn't hit one to start the season, which is crazy, but he has some nice upside here, and he's hitting the ball decent, and so he's definitely worth taking a look. Corbin Carroll also looking like a really good option today for Arizona. He's hit the ball pretty well to start the year. He's got a lot of good fantasy point games, and I really like his matchup today, so he's definitely somebody I'm going to consider on the slate. And then for some Hail Mary plays, Kerry Carpenter for Detroit. He's hitting the ball, about as good as anybody on Detroit is. The only downside is he's probably not going to go out of RBIs, but if he can bash a home run, then he can definitely pay off. And Estory Ruiz for Oakland, he's another guy that's kind of in a boomer bust position. He has actually been hitting the ball decently well. Of course, I do like the pitching against him today, but he definitely has some upside in this matchup. Anthony Santander is also a guy to consider today. He's a little bit more expensive, but he has some upside in this matchup, and despite the fact he's not hitting the ball well, he's somebody to consider if this game plays. So let's go ahead and get over to FanDuel, and I've got some good options here as well. Now at pitcher, it's kind of regulated to a couple good options, with Heaney being the probably top option here, or Valdez. But Heaney, he's got the best matchup and as much upside as anybody on the slate. Valdez is also interesting. But he's a little bit high risk, high reward today simply because of the matchup. But he definitely has boom potential if he can get enough strikeouts. And Kyle Wright is definitely interesting over here, though his price is not nearly as easy to deal with as it is on DraftKings, where he's a lot cheaper. And so he is in play, but he is a little riskier on this particular slate. Then we're going to look at our catchers and first baseman and look at Salvador Perez first. He's my core play for this position. And normally I try to avoid catchers here, but he's all the metrics just scream a home run from him today. And so I really like him as a top matchup. Vinny Pasquanto for Kansas City, also in a really solid spot here against Tyler Anderson. And I really like his upside. He's been getting hits in most games. Obviously, he's got some boomer bust potential, but he's cheap enough to consider. Justin Turner also looks like a really nice option for Boston today, and he can play multiple positions, so that definitely helps as well. But he's hitting the ball pretty solidly, and he has home run potential here. Ty France also looking like a really good option for Seattle. He's a little bit more expensive, but he's cheap enough that you can pretty much fit in any of these guys that you like, depending on which team stacks you want to do. But he's definitely worth taking a look at. And then Nathaniel Lowe, also for Texas. I really like Texas stack today. He's definitely a way you can fit a couple of different Texas players in, and his price is just too cheap for his potential. Looking at second base, Ozzy Albies definitely jumps off the page as a pretty good option today. He's hitting the ball pretty well lately, and I like his matchup for himself, like a personal matchup. Obviously, I don't really love a Atlanta stack considering the matchup, with Valdez, but they have some nice upside. Marcus Semien also looking really solid today as a good option on the slate. He has high risk, high reward, but he's got a lot of potential. Then we're going to look at Jake Cronenworth as a kind of an alternative option. He's a little bit cheap, so that gives him some upside. He hasn't been hitting the ball very well, but he does have home run potential, and if he can start hitting the ball better, he'll become a guy that you definitely want to utilize day in and day out. Riley looks like an interesting option at third base here for Atlanta. He's hitting the ball extremely well to start the year. He's got home run potential in this one, and he has some nice metrics for this matchup against Houston. Alex Bregman, also interesting. He's actually been scoring a decent amount of fantasy points lately, despite not hitting the ball all that well. He's getting hits in just about every game, but still sporting just a 231 batting average. But he's definitely cheap enough that he's worth a look. And then Manny Machado, also somebody that's not hitting the ball particularly well, but he has home run potential, boomer bust upside, and so he's definitely worth consideration here on this slate. And moving into shortstop, we're going to look at Tatis Jr. for San Diego. He's at $4,400. It's extremely expensive, but he is definitely worth taking a look at. At some point, he's going to hit a home run, and today's as good as any day to do that. Xander Bogaerts is actually hitting the ball extremely well, and I really like him as my favorite player at this position, so he's got some nice upside, but he is a little expensive here as well. And then Willie Adames is a good alternative to those guys. If you want to stay or clear San Diego, then he's a good way to go. He's got some nice upside in this matchup and definitely worth consideration. Mike Trout in the outfield looks like a great play today. I think he's going to hit a home run today. It's been a while since he's hit one. It's been like 10 games or so, and he's got boomer bust potential here, obviously, but he's actually not as expensive as I expected him to be. Juan Soto is underpriced here. Obviously, he hasn't hit the ball particularly well to start the year, but he's got boom potential, and he gets on base decently, so it's just a matter of time before he hits another home run, and this looks like as good a day for him as well. Otani also looks really interesting today. He's got some high risk, high reward on this slate, but he's got a nice matchup, and so he's definitely worth a consideration. Kyle Tucker has been absolutely mashing the ball when it comes to home run potential, and he's got nice upside in this matchup. It's high risk, high reward, doing a pretty decent pitching, but he's got some potential. Rob Snyder is a really good value play in the outfield. He's got good potential for a home run today. He's been kind of boom or bust throughout the season, but he's definitely worth a consideration today. Jesse Winker, also very interesting as a good option and a good alternative to Snyder. Now, he definitely has home run potential. He just hasn't hit one yet this season, which is somewhat surprising at this point. But anyway, he'll have some nice opportunity here. And then Corbin Carroll, finally, last but not least, is a decent option today. He's hitting the ball fairly well. He's having a lot of good fantasy days. He's getting stolen bases too, which is definitely an advantage, so he's definitely worth in consideration. With that said, guys, thank you for liking, commenting, subscribing. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below, and have a nice day, guys.